Well, good morning, everyone. Boker Tov. Welcome to the Yachad BeYeshua Conference here in the University of Toronto, Wycliffe College. We are having a great time so far. We've just come from an amazing time of worship at an Orthodox church just across the street. And now we begin our conversation with one another about our theme of the conference based on Numbers chapter 24, verse 5. How fair are your tents, O Jacob? Today, as we consider this topic, we will be looking especially at how do we relate and be part of the people of God known as Israel. Ahavat Israel is above all about relationships with other Jews. Jewish life entails association and solidarity with other Jews. This is a challenge for us as Jewish disciples of Yeshua, especially in the diaspora. To cultivate such relationships requires intentionality and a willingness to go beyond our comfort zone. But Yeshua never shied away from uncomfortable situations, and he lived the most intentional of lives in service to, quote, the lost sheep of Israel, to whose national benefit his saving death was oriented. As all the Gospels show, such service took the form of loving relationships with particular people. And so this morning, what we are going to do is introduce to you 4 speakers who will share about this topic of what does it mean for Jewish disciples of Jesus from varying perspectives, Messianic, Orthodox, Catholic, Reformation, Protestant, Free Church, Pentecostal, etc. How do we approach this journey goal, this intention? And so we have a number of speakers who will share with us. Then we will ask them to maybe interact with one another. One of them will be by Zoom, I believe, today. And then we're going to open it up to conversation and questions among the totality of us. For those on Zoom, there are about 35 of us here present in the most remarkable room you could ever ask Wycliffe College to give to us, because not only is it fun to be with one another, but we are literally surrounded by artwork from Marc Chagall about the theme of him and the Bible. It's the most wonderful setting I could ever imagine for a couple of days of conversation for us. And so our first speaker this morning, who will introduce the topic, is Rachel Wolf, who is a Messianic Jewish teacher and writer. She and her husband, Michael, grew up in the Jewish community of Philadelphia and were pioneers in the early Messianic Jewish movement from 1971. They have led Beth Messiah congregation in Cincinnati, Ohio, United States, since 1977. Let's welcome Rachel to the podium.
Can I put this here?
Yes.
Thank you.
You know the mic for you. They can see you.
Well, if you haven't noticed, I'm a little short, so the talking head, relationship and presence. And I noticed in one place it said that this talk was on being, which is very apropos for me. If I were to summarize this short talk, my mantra would be, one cannot be a Jew alone. To be a Jew is to be part of the Jewish people. We need our fellow Jews in order for our own identity as individual Jews to be anything more than a relic of the past. I feel this reality acutely and often painfully for its lack in my life at this time. Okay, so what do these 3 things have in common? The story of the 4 sons in the Pesach Haggadah, the 4 species of Sukkot, and a well-known Jewish saying, the 4 sons. The Torah speaks of 4 types of children. Actually, the Haggadah speaks of it, but I think the Haggadah says the Torah speaks of it. 4 types of children, sons. One is wise, one is wicked, one is simple, and one does not know enough to ask. The wise one asks, the goody-goody, what is the meaning of the laws and traditions God has commanded? And that is from Deuteronomy 6:20, which I will read in a minute. You should teach him all the traditions of Passover, even to the last detail. the wicked one, and I think it says Ra. Does anyone know? In the Hebrew, I think it's just Ra, which doesn't necessarily mean wicked, but, and as a child, I always was like, that is really harsh. He's not being wicked. He's just saying this. But the wicked one asked, what does this ritual mean to you? Exodus 12:26. By using the expression to you, he excludes himself from his people and denies God. So excluding himself from his people is denying God. And I thought, it does seem harsh. Then I looked up, and I don't actually know if I ever have read this in terms of the Haggadah before, but I looked up Deuteronomy 6:20-25 and counted how many first person plural pronouns and verbs there are in that passage. So you can count with me, or I'll just emphasize them. So Deuteronomy 20-25. When your son asks you in times to come, saying, what is the meaning of the testimony, statutes, and judgments which the Lord our God has commanded you in this case, then you shall say to your son, we were slaves of Pharaoh in Egypt, and the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand, and the Lord showed signs and wonders before our eyes, great and severe against Egypt, Pharaoh and all his household. Then he brought us out from there, that he might bring us in to give us the land which he swore to our fathers. And the Lord commanded us to observe all these statutes, to fear the Lord our God for our good always, that he might preserve us alive as it is this day. Then it will be righteousness for us if we are careful to observe all these commandments before the Lord as he has commanded us. I counted 15. If anybody has a correction, I'm happy to be corrected on that. All right, the 4 species of Sukkot. In the Midrash Pesikta Rav Kahana, chapter 27, there is a Midrash on Leviticus 23:40, where Hashem is giving Moses the mitzvot regarding the first day of Sukkot. The people are to seek out and bring together 4 divergent kinds of natural species. So they both seek them out and bring them together. The fruit of the Eitz Hadar, the splendid tree, branches of palm trees, boughs of leafy trees, and willows of a brook or river. The Pesikta interprets these 4 species as 4 types of Jews. The splendid etrog has both beautiful aroma and edible fruit. So Israel has those in its midst that have the knowledge of Torah and also the merit of good deeds. The palm tree has edible fruit, but no aroma. So Israel has those in its midst with the knowledge of Torah, but not the merit of good deeds. The myrtle tree has aroma, but not edible fruit. So Israel has those in its midst that have the merit of good deeds, but not the knowledge of Torah. The willow has neither edible fruit nor aroma. So Israel has those in its midst that have neither the knowledge of Torah nor the merit of good deeds. In the Midrash, the Holy One, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, says, in order to make it impossible for Israel to be destroyed, let all of the different kinds of Jews be bound together as plants of different kinds are bound into a cluster, so that the righteous among them will atone for the others. 3, a well-known Jewish saying, Kol Yisrael or Klal Yisrael Aravim Zelazeh or Zabazeh. I prefer Zabazeh. All Israel is responsible for one another. On the one hand, I cannot be a Jew alone without the rest of my people. On the other hand, my people is not complete without me. When we Jewish followers of Yeshua are separated from our people, both we and our people suffer for it. We are a family, and not only a family, but a family whose ancestors were all miraculously conceived for a prophetic covenantal purpose in the hidden plans of God. We are bound together through a covenant of fire, smoke, blood, and words, many words. Take a little break. So to summarize, we ourselves have come out of Egypt. The injunction to see ourselves thus present in the history of our people does not end at the crossing of the sea, we don't just see ourselves coming out of Egypt with our people. I believe the injunction to say, what the Lord did for me when I came forth out of Egypt extends to standing at Sinai, to the 40-year trek in the wilderness, to entering the land, and to all of our exiles, and to the present day. Number two, we are bound together in this life, in our history, in our present, in our future. The weaker vessels are strengthened by the stronger. Three, we are interconnected, and to break that connection is somehow a shattering. And I thought of the Tzimtzum, which we don't have time to talk about, in the shattering in the order of the universe. So this is not actually my summary, but I said summary, but here are what I was thinking about: 4 motivations for relationship and presence with our people. Number one, for our own personal identities to be whole. Number two, for Jewish unity. Number 3, for the glory of God. And number 4, for God's glory in his work of redemption to go forth. And obviously there's not time within my time space to discuss all of these, so I'll just very briefly touch on them. So number 1, as I said, one cannot be a Jew alone. To be a Jew is to stand at Sinai and at Auschwitz in covenant with our people. I have struggled with this question. Can I find God? Can I find faith in the ashes at Auschwitz? And it actually led me to take a trip to Auschwitz, but we'll have to talk about that another time. Number 2, for Jewish unity. Michael Vishegrad's essay called A Theology of Jewish Unity, which I read in the collection called Abraham's Promise. Well, in that essay, he quotes, there are some quotes that I'm going to give you on Jewish unity. There's a whole chapter on Jewish unity. Only a Judaism, this is Michael Vishegrad, only a Judaism or Jewishness that is permeated by love for the Jewish people and an almost absolute determination to affirm all Jews, even as it disagrees with this or that, can today be taken seriously. The next one, the deepest unity of the Jewish people is rooted in the relationship of this people to God. Jewish unity is therefore a theological issue of the greatest seriousness. And number 3, quote from Vishegrad, the Jewish people is the carrier of the Torah as a people in whose life it is embodied. And I think that is a statement worth, I mean, we could spend several hours discussing that. It is not just laws that we're carrying. It is, our life is embodied in it, and we embody it. So our conference program states, as has been said a couple times already, our desire for attachment to the people of Israel is not a separate matter from our desire for attachment to the God of Israel or the Messiah of Israel, emphasizing Vishegrad's point. 3 and 4 kind of go together of my reasons for a relationship and presence with the Jewish people, for the glory of God and for his historic work of redemption to go forth. I believe our presence in the body of Israel is important. I hesitate to say essential, although part of me feels that, but God could do it in any way he wants. But I believe it's important, possibly essential, to the fulfillment of the eschatological vision of comfort for Israel that we see in Isaiah and all of the prophets. So I want to talk a minute about our mission. And I'm not part of the Yachad BeYeshua, coordinating committee. So I'm just going to give you my thoughts on this we haven't talked about mission, and there's so many different things, but I'm going to give you my thoughts on this, if I can find my place. Okay, so our mission as this session is relationship and presence, but I would add an adjective. I believe our mission is relationship and prophetic presence. In a paper I presented in 2007, I started with this: Messianic Judaism is a movement with a message. In its own time and for his own purposes, God suddenly and sovereignly revealed to a bunch of Jewish hippies that the one the Goyim believed in was indeed our Jewish Messiah. We had heard of the Messiah in folktales and jokes, but most of us had no idea what a Messiah actually was, or even knew much about Torah. This sudden, complete revelation to so many in such a short time by the Spirit of God was accompanied by a strong and immediate sense of mission to our people. Looking back, it utterly amazes me how universally shared was this powerful sense of mission and message that came out of nowhere for most of us. We were undeniably called for such a time as this to share our newborn faith and vision with our own people. This mission was all-encompassing. It changed our lives and became the center of our lives. We knew we wanted to remain Jews and not become Christians. Messianic Jewish congregations popped up all over the US. Nearly every Jewish believer we knew at that time, either alone or through the annual MJAA, the Messianic Jewish Alliance conferences, founded a Messianic Jewish congregation in their city if there was not one already. We Jewish Jesus freaks wanted to continue to be Jews and discover together how to be Jews that follow Jesus. We also sought to create a space where other Jews would feel welcome and could come to have the same spiritual awakening that we had had. We wanted to continue in relationship with our fellow Jews and continue to be present in the Jewish community. However, 50 years later, this is not entirely how it has worked out at all. Back in 1971, there was no one to teach us how to be Messianic Jews. There was no place to go to learn this. No one had attempted it since the first few centuries of the Common Era. And here we were in the almost post-Christian, post-Holocaust, Vietnam protesting, Timothy Leary and Bob Dylan era of the America of the 1960s and 70s. Because of this theological and cultural vacuum, early Messianic Judaism quickly became influenced by the evangelical mission, to put it bluntly, to get people saved. In practice, that usually translated into pulling Jews out of Jewish community, pulling Jews out of that circle into either churches or Messianic congregations. It wasn't anybody's fault. This is what happened. This is how the world looked at that time. But I personally felt like Alice, gone through some strange looking glass into a dizzying, unsettling world. I had been secure. I had been found among my people, and now I was lost. Here's a journal entry of mine from May 6, 2013. Observation about my response to a JCC class on suffering. I enjoyed sitting in the auditorium at the local JCC, thoroughly engaged in the presentations on historical Jewish responses to suffering. My depression momentarily abated. I felt faith and compassion rise up in me. Why did thinking about moments of our greatest horror and our people's responses to these moments create in me renewed hope? These stories of suffering together as a people are the fertilizer of the soil I developed in. This soil yielded in me the particular Jewish questions about life, about God, that are part of my DNA. This is why typical Jewish answers to life fall flat to me. This is why I had no answer for the woman who visited our congregation and passionately asked me, why don't Jews care about salvation when they are so concerned about kosher laws? And you stare. Here at the JCC, sitting with my people, did I find hope in exploring our national tragedies? Because this is where I need to find God with my people, not for my people. I have argued in a commentary on Parshat Beshalach, which includes the Exodus 15 passage about crossing the sea, that the Exodus from Egypt is not primarily about release from slavery. It is not a statement about freedom. It is not a metaphor for coming out of the slavery of sin into the freedom of forgiveness. At the beginning of Exodus 6, at Moses' lowest point of despair, after the Pharaoh told the Israelites they have to find their own straw, Hashem basically puts his arm around Moses' shoulders and says, come, sit down, my son. Let me explain what this is all about. Hashem goes on to review the history of the covenant, naming each one of the fathers, saying that he has established his covenant with each one, and hearing the groaning of the people of Israel, he has remembered his covenant, and he will now reactivate the covenant and in its next phase, bring the people into the land of their inheritance. In fact, it seems that the covenants go to the land, and all that means in the prophet's future visions happens in phases. I see the calling of the fathers as the conception of the covenant, the time in Egypt as the long gestation, heated and restricted, where the people grow from a family into a nation. The story of Moses and Pharaoh I see as the confusing, painful transition toward birth. Those of you that have born children, you know what I'm talking about. And the passage through the sea that is opened up as the traumatic birth of the nation of Israel. In fact, the parting of the sea is a phase so important that God performs an astounding miracle that has remained in public view forever. The Exodus is not mainly about slavery or sin. It is about God's eternal plan moving forward. The phases of our covenant include many diverse periods of exile and return, of disobedience and obedience. When looking back to 1970 and 71, I cannot believe that the amazing outpouring of revelation in the 60s and 70s was just so that we could have yet another denomination called Messianic Judaism. This outpouring, I personally believe, was the utterly miraculous beginning perhaps, I say all these words lightly, because not lightly, but without certainty, because I'm not God. But to me, it looks like the miraculous beginning of Isaiah's Awake, Awake, chapter 52. And then if you'll indulge me, I'm going to read a few verses from that. So Isaiah 52, and I cut out a few places, so I'm not going to mention where. You can look it up. Awake, awake, put on your strength, O Zion. Put on your beautiful garments, O Jerusalem, the holy city. Shake yourself from the dust. Arise, sit down, O Jerusalem. Loose yourself from the bonds of your neck, O captive daughter of Zion. For thus says the Lord, you have sold yourself for nothing, and you shall be redeemed without money. Therefore my people shall know my name. Therefore they shall know in that day that I am he who speaks. And I had a whole section on Kol Hashem, the voice of the Lord from the garden into Isaiah, but I had to cut it out. But our people have not been able to hear the voice of the Lord. They don't believe that God speaks anymore. Therefore, they shall know in that day that, behold, I am he who speaks. Behold, it is I. How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news, who proclaims peace, shalom, who brings glad tidings, besorah, of good things, who proclaims salvation, who says to Zion, your God reigns. And in Isaiah 40, you know how it says the voice speaks, say this, and it doesn't say, what is that voice? And it sounds like it's saying, Israel, tell Israel, Jerusalem, tell Zion, Zion, tell the cities of Judah. So it's all within this thing, but we have to speak. Your God reigns. Your watchmen shall lift up their voices, and with their voices they shall sing together, for they shall see eye to eye when the Lord brings back Zion. Break forth into joy, sing together, you waste places of Jerusalem. For the Lord has comforted his people. He has redeemed Jerusalem. The way I understand it is that we are entering the period of God's comfort for Zion. We are entering into the Haftorah cycle of comfort after the scourges of Tisha B'Av. I don't understand all the details by any means, but I believe that the spontaneous and remarkable move of God's Spirit among us young Jews in the 60s and 70s, and that includes you that grew up within, say, a Jewish Catholic or Jewish Orthodox family or whatever that is, this is a move of God's Spirit. It's for the sake of all. Exodus 6:9 says that Moses spoke God's words of comfort to the people of Israel in Egypt, but lo sham'u, they could not hear him because of kotzer ruach, because of anguish of spirit, despondency, lack of hope. I think we find ourselves in a similar situation among our people. Certainly the details are quite different, but most of our people can no longer hear the voice of the Lord. They're too discouraged in so many diverse ways. The vast majority no longer believe that God speaks to us, that God has a voice, that the Lord will save from on high, that there's any power or interest in this world. I don't know how it will happen, but I believe it starts here with us being in unity, with the Jewish people, the disciples of Yeshua, following together in relationship and presence with our people. We are to stand with and among our people and find our faith with our people in faithful relationship and prophetic presence.
You can clap, yes. Yeah. Yes. No, they're free. They're actually very expensive. We're charging for them, but that's okay. Thank you. Thank you, Rachel, very much. That was a great way to kick us off and get us considering 4 issues. Many of us did, in fact, discover Jesus during that miraculous time. 1971 was the start of the journey for me as well. So we have much to talk about, Rachel, about its implications. Our second presenter today is Greg Stone, who serves as the Protestant pastor since 19. I have her. It was changed. Sister Eliana, can you hear me? Is she there?
Yes, yes, I am here.
I miss
Can you
seeing
hear
you
me?
in person, I must say. But
One second.
I'm glad you're with us on Zoom. Sister Eliana
Yes, so
Kurylo.
someone needs to put the video on for me. That's all.
What happened to our man? Here he comes. We need the video for the Zoom for Sister Kurylo. Sister, you need to do it from your side. You just have to turn your camera on.
It says you cannot start your video because the host has stopped it.
Oh, we're working on it.
All right.
The original apostles, disciples of Jesus, never had to deal with electronics when they held meetings. It's a very interesting situation. Okay. We're working on it. We're working on it. Hang in there, sister. We're working for you.
Yeah, no worries.
We're working. Something's
Okay,
going to happen.
I'm here.
There you are. Welcome.
Hello.
Well, now I can introduce you. Sister Eliana Kurylo is a member and the superior of the Sisters of the Beatitudes community in Emmaus, Nicopolis, Israel. She is involved with the newly opened Heschel Center for Jewish Christian Dialogue in Lublin, Poland. She is also a biblical Hebrew tutor at the Biblical Institute of Toulouse, France. So, sister, share with us what God has put on your heart and soul.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this presentation. And I will present more of a Hebrew or Jewish Catholic perspective on this topic. And thank you, Judith, for this really interesting and nourishing introduction. I will start by saying that recently I was reading a book of the late Pope Benedict XVI entitled "What is Christianity?" And it is a remarkable work in which quite a few chapters are dedicated to Jewish-Christian relations. There are some very deep and insightful reflections, and there's also a phrase that particularly struck me and that I find very fitting for today's topic. When asked about Jewish-Christian dialogue, Benedict said that the most important thing for him is mutual understanding and building friendships. I think that the order of the phrase is very important for us as well. Mutual understanding before friendships. Without mutual understanding, there can be no presence and there are no relationships. Healthy communication can mend what is broken. Bad communication can break what has been built, and no communication can bring a relationship to a standstill or can end it. And as on this panel, we're supposed to make an honest assessment of what has produced good fruit and what has been most difficult. I would like to speak of challenges first in order to finish on a higher note later on. I think that seeking mutual understanding is not without a challenge. Often our momentary discouragement, lack of patience, or disillusionment may lead to speaking badly of one another, may lead to lashon hara or a gossiping attitude. And sadly, I have seen this happen several times, which led to damaged relationships and people losing contact with one another. I have seen that it led some of my friends to a kind of isolation situations when ashamed of participating in criticism, some were not able to go back to a friendship or visiting a community they previously appreciated. And instead they got locked in a relationship with one or two people who persisted in a criticizing attitude. The good news is that I haven't seen a lot of this, but still I find that's already a few situations are too many and sad. I find the challenge of seeking mutual understanding very healthy though, and constructive, because it does not stop at someone's shortcomings or imperfections. It also reminds me of what Mark said last year in Dallas. One Jew is not able to observe perfectly 613 commandments, but all Israel united together can. And there is a similar notion in the Catholic Church when it comes to celebrating the sacraments. A priest celebrating or giving a sacrament is not required to be perfect or sinless. The same goes for a person receiving a particular sacrament. This is possible because we believe that the Church, through her prayer and spiritual union with Christ, makes up for the human imperfections or temporary lapses of attention. Just as Judith pointed out at the beginning of this meeting, there are many types of Jews, and many of them, many types, more or less perfect, make up the body of Yeshua. And I believe that the same goes when it comes to building mutual understanding and cultivating friendships. We will never be perfect, but we can complete one another. And I have seen it in my life and in the life of other people. There were moments when my friends from Israel, upon hearing that I was from Poland, would say, "You're from Poland, the land of Shoah, then let us help you get connected with your Jewish heritage. Let us be your Jewish cousins that you couldn't have had when you were growing up." And it is truly comforting that without having a chance to get a proper Jewish upbringing or an early Jewish education, I am not perceived as a lesser Jew. Their attitude is very simple. An invitation to Shabbat, going to Beit Knesset on a feast day, or studying together. Our community is sometimes visited by a friend from a nearby Haredi town, and I often have deep conversations with him about all sorts of things. He sometimes invites me and other members of my community to pray together or to enter into Shabbat together. And last week he came to our place and said, "Eliana, I would like you to help me with something. Next month, I am going to Poland, and it is a Shoah trip. I have never been to Poland or a concentration camp before. Please tell me about your experiences and help me get ready for it." And this was a very moving moment because I felt like he helped me to become a bit more whole before, and now it was my turn to help him. Another example of mutual building was when I visited family in Israel, and two families who are members of Yachad BeYeshua welcomed us for Kabbalat Shabbat. And later, another dear friend welcomed us in her sukkah on the first day of Sukkot. Nobody asked how much Hebrew my parents spoke or what kind of education they had. They were simply welcomed as they are. And let me tell you, it was an immensely profound, if not a healing experience for them. And words cannot express their gratitude and the joy for the doors that were opened. Another example is from my daily life at the monastery. As we're in charge of an archaeological site, we meet many Israeli groups and we speak to several of them on a weekly basis. They have questions about what we do, but also sometimes they want to know what the Catholic Church says about the Jews. And thank God for the progress done since the Second Vatican Council. We often manage to tell them about the changes that happened over the last 70 years. And it is surprising to see how much they are moved. As a result, some of the Israelis who come as tourists after those kinds of meetings, become our friends and even volunteers. Last week, for example, one of them came when we had a big group of pilgrims, and he helped us serve them lunch because he wanted to give a testimony of openness to Christians. A few months ago, I started a long-distance work for Heschel Center in Lublin, in Poland, and the center opened in order to promote more understanding between Jews and Catholics. One of the projects is about writing Jewish commentaries on Sunday Gospels. It is my job to find contributors from Israel, and often some of them call me or text me about the commentaries they're working on, which often ends up in a very rich biblical sharing and discovering new horizons together. Perhaps the last example I'd like to mention is the one concerning my order, the Community of the Beatitudes. And since I started with Mark, let me finish by mentioning him again. A few years ago, Mark came to France to give a series of talks. At that time, I was part of the General House team, as I was the General Secretary of the Sisters. Mark came to speak with our general superiors and also had a meeting with several of the community members in our monastery in Toulouse. During a Q&A session, someone asked Mark what he thought about the fact that every Friday night we celebrate Kabbalat Shabbat and also celebrate Jewish feast days, festivals. Without any criticism and with an open spirit, Mark pointed out to the fact that my order was using some blessings that were meant for the Jewish world only and made a suggestion to introduce a few changes to those prayers. The community took his remarks not as something negative, but as an invitation to an even greater expression of love for Israel. The prayers he spoke about were soon corrected worldwide, and since then, I have seen many times our Jewish friends being moved, sometimes even to tears, by a more accurate expression of my community's desire to pray with our Jewish brothers and sisters. All those little testimonies are here to say that there's a great value in growing together and nurturing mutual understanding. Together, we can enrich one another and even compensate for what is lacking. What we do together can overflow like grace, just like in the case of the Jewish friends serving Christian pilgrims, or Mark helping my congregation. There is a great value in being present to one another. This too can spread wider than we think in the areas of education, for example, like in the case of writing Jewish commentaries of the gospel, or helping someone to be more connected with their Jewish heritage, or helping preparing for a Shoah trip. So just to conclude, I will say this, that during my past training as a teacher, I was told that for one negative word that is addressed to someone, we need to provide 7 positive words to counterbalance this one negative phrase. So I would say at the end, let us not be discouraged if we encounter some obstacles in our relationships with one another, also in Yachad BeYeshua. But let our criticism be constructive. Let us cultivate healthy communication. Let us be present to one another, because we need one another in order to grow and repair this world and to give a powerful testimony of Am Israel and the body of the Messiah. Thank you.
Thank you, sister, and stay with us because there may be questions for you, and we'd like you to certainly participate in the discussion to come. Our third presenter, I believe I've got this right now, is going to be Greg. You've had 10 minutes to get through everything else you wanted to say. Greg Stone has served as the Protestant pastor since 1995 and currently serves as the pastor of Jewish ministries in Dallas at Gateway Church, and also as an adjunct professor for the King's University. He has been married to his wife, Donna, for 40 years. They have 5 adult children and amazingly 12 grandchildren. So that's a baseball team plus some reserves. Let's welcome Greg. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. I do feel very blessed by the way that the Lord has blessed me. I would have been the last person with my last name, Stone, had the Lord not done something remarkable. And I wish I had time to tell you that, but to have 12 grandchildren is really a huge blessing. I really want to thank Mark for putting this together, and Lee, thank you. And Father Antoine, thank you, especially Dr. David Rudolph from the King's University, who I have the privilege of working with on a regular basis, and a dear friend, and I've never known a more loving pastoral scholar. That's really what he is, and so I'm really blessed. My thoughts here as I talk, I thought about this. They'll be a little different from the others. My thoughts might seem a bit disjointed because I'm going to talk about practical things that we actually do. And I kept going over the questions that you gave us so that I would address those questions. And I really wanted to address those. So my context, first of all, is Gateway Church. It's a large church, one of the largest mega churches in the U.S. It's a Gentile church. I do not lead a Messianic synagogue. We have a Messianic ministry within the church. It's very large. It's very prosperous. Pastor Robert Morris was asked a number of years ago to talk about why this church was so blessed, and he didn't want to do that. He felt awkward, and he felt like the Lord told him to do it. And so he was talking to pastors, and he wrote this lesson, and the Lord said, that's not right. And he said, well, what do you mean, Lord, it's not right? Then why is this church so blessed? And the Lord gave him a parable. And the bottom line of the parable was, or is, that because he asked the Lord, would it be okay with you if I tried to reach some of your original children? And the Lord said, and that is the reason this church is so blessed. In a completely unrelated setting, a number of years later, I heard it said that the church actually has per capita giving twice that of the second place church. So, and Pastor Robert says this is the reason. So when you have a leader like that, and he doesn't talk about Israel all the time, he does not talk about Jewish things all the time, but when he does, it's that clear. And then I get to lead in that. So I'm in a very good setting for a Jewish person who believes in Yeshua. The church has 10 campuses across the Dallas-Fort Worth area. One in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, has a number of prison campuses. We have at Gateway what I would say are 3 Jewish departments. We have the local Jewish ministries, which I lead. We have what's called the Gateway Center for Israel, which exists to help Gentile pastors catch the vision of reaching Israel and supporting Israel. And then we have the King's University, which is sort of independent because they are an independent, but we never meet, the leadership never meets without David. So even though he's not officially, he is de facto part of what we do. So we have 3 Jewish departments. My department has 4 people in it, 3 of whom are Jewish. David has 3 people in his department, 2 of whom are Jewish. And the Gateway Center has 7 people, 1 of whom is Jewish. So that's our setting. Local Jewish ministry, what I lead. We have a Shabbat service once a month. Usually, almost always the first Friday of the month, because Pastor Robert says to the Jew first. Got that from a good source. And so we have once a month, the first Friday of the month, we'll have a Shabbat service. And it's a Gentile church. So I've asked the people on 2 different occasions, can I ask you, how many of you in this room have a Jewish grandparent, at least one on any side? And the 2 times we've asked, 29%, 26.5%. So this is a Gentile church. About a month ago, I asked our Havdalah group, which meets weekly, how many of you in this room have a Jewish grandparent on either side? And 29.0% of the people in the room said they had a Jewish grandparent. So that's our setting. Personally, one of the things that I do, I put on my calendar, Friday's my day off. So I put on my calendar every Friday morning 2 appointments. think Jewish attendees, and then I wrote Gentile Messianics. And I keep a list in my calendar, and the names are just in there. When I learn of somebody who's Jewish, I just put them in there. When I see someone who's really remarkably a supporter of what we do, I put them in that other list, and I just open up the file, the calendar event every Friday, and I look at it. How can I help these people? So it's just a practical part of what I do. When I talk to the church, whether they be Jews or Gentiles, I will talk about the fact, I'll present the Sabbath like this, because the Sabbath is really our best opportunity. If you want to grow a Jewish understanding, both amongst the Jewish people and amongst the Gentiles, the Sabbath is our best opportunity. And so I will say to them something like this. Almost all of us know what it's like to be slapped by your father. Almost everybody. I was slapped by my father. And to be frank, I probably deserved every time it happened. Okay, I'm not in any way critical of my stepfather for the times that he disciplined me. But how many people actually know what it's like to have your father put his hand on your head and bless you? How many people have seen their mother and their father fight? But how many people know what it's like to watch their father put his hand on your mother's head and bless her? Imagine if just once a month you had a Sabbath in your home and your son had to deal with the embarrassment of you putting your hand on his head and blessing. And if just once a month he had to watch you bless your wife, his mother like that, just once a month. And what if you didn't even invite anybody over, but you just did, it's just your family. And what if once a month you said, let's invite another family over? Now your kid is sitting there with his friend and he's having to deal with the embarrassment of not only like being blessed by his father, but this happening now in front of his friend. And his friend and he have both seen their parents fight, but he is watching his father bless his mother in front of his friends. What if just once a month you did that? And then if just once a month you came to the Shabbat service that Gateway has? And then what if just the other time, don't make any rules, do what feels right. And that could be your Sabbath. How different would your legacy be when you're gone? It'd be completely different. And all you did was keep the Sabbath and love your family. Your whole world would be different. Your kids would be different. They'd be talking about you decades after you were gone. People get it. I have a guiding Jewish ministry philosophy, and I build it off of this thought. There's neither Jew nor Gentile, male nor female, slave nor free. Okay, I didn't lose my masculine identity when I got saved. I woke up the next day, I'm still a man. I want my wife to celebrate her femininity right in front of me. I think if a man doesn't want that, he's lost it. You know, I want my wife to be a woman in front of me. And I think the same philosophy applies to the idea of Jew and Gentile. The same book that says that a man and a woman become one, we don't lose our identity there. The same book says the Jew and the Gentile become one in Ephesians 2. Why would I lose my identity there? Then I'll say something like this. Imagine I'll be talking to a man. I've had this conversation countless times. I'm talking to a man, and I'll say something like this. You and I are not going to agree on all of the details of what it means to be the man of the family. If we came up with a list of 30 things, they could be very different. But the one thing we're going to quickly agree on is that it's very significant that we are the men of the family. The details, okay, the list, but how significant is it that I am the man of the family? It's very significant. And how significant is it that my wife is the female, the woman of the family? Very significant. The details are going to differ. I believe the same thing applies to Jew and Gentile. And I believe, I really believe that it's not my job to make Jewish people look like me. It's my job to prepare men to be able to stand before God and give account for what they are as men. I'm not going to have to give account for the kind of mother I was. But I am going to have to give account for the kind of man and father and husband that I am. And I'm going to have to give account for what kind of Jew I am. And you're not going to have to give account for being the kind of Jew that I think you need to be. And within this room, we're going to have great differences of opinion on what it means to be Jewish. My job, as it were, my calling is to help Jewish people be the Jew that they will be prepared to stand before God and say, this is what I have done. They're not going to have to give account to me. That's my calling. And I find there's a lot of Jewish people who have different perspectives. They feel more of this, more of that. That's okay. That's really okay. It's kind of where I'm at. Now I believe this. And I say this to people. I believe that identity demands function. If I am given the identity of being a man, on Judgment Day, I'm going to have to give account for what kind of man I am. If I'm given the identity of being a father, I'm going to have to give account for what kind of father I am. I will never have to give account for what kind of mother I am. I will never have to give account for what kind of woman I am. Now, if God has given to me a Jewish identity, identity demands function. What have I done with it? That's the question. So I have no problem looking at Jewish people and say, what are you going to do with it? I'll help you figure it out, but it's not going to look like me, but you're going to have to give account for this. And that's just reality. I believe that. What do we do with reaching outside the church? I just thinking about disjointed because I'm looking at the questions, Okay, so, okay, we relate with Messianic Jews outside Gateway around the world. The Gateway, especially the Gateway Center, does that a lot. But I personally try to do that as much as I can, even though it's not exactly in my portfolio. But I'm a human being. So when they have meetings, I want to be there. Just like I'm privileged to serve Dr. David Rudolph at TKU. So I want to be there. I want to be here. So I'm always looking for ways to be involved. We have a Messianic Synagogue, Baruch Hashem, Rabbi Marty Wallman. Many of you will know him. His son Ari has now taken over the leadership of the synagogue. So we've had him speak for us, and he's had me speak for him, and I get to participate in other things with them. Before I was at Gateway, I still have credentials with a Pentecostal denomination, and even though I'm not at with that denomination now, I still have their credentials and actually serve as their vice president of what they call the National Jewish Fellowship. So just before I came, I looked into how many congregations do they have. Well, we have 13 to 14 congregations and 10 to 11 parachurch ministries. So I'm looking for ways to be involved. We just need to look for ways to do. I'm just practical. I'm just a practical person. What do I do? What do I do? One of the things that drives me is, in fact, I've had this conversation a number of times. somebody will say, my heart wasn't right, so I wasn't ready to do this thing. And my thought on that is, it doesn't really matter how I feel about where my heart's at. What's the right thing to do? Well, God, I wasn't ready, so I didn't do it. No, go do it. Whatever it is, just go do it. Get your heart right, but go do what God's called you to do. You see the point? Do what he's called. Let's do what he's called us to do. What is it that God's called us to do? Let's just do it. Nike, I guess, right? And we can work on our hearts, because I need God's help. But my heart is just never good enough. It's never good enough. That's just the reality of who I am. My time's up. Thank you. You know what? Let's see if there's anything I'll just say close with one thought. What has been most difficult for me? And that would be, I do feel rejection. I appreciated what Sister Eliana said. She appreciated the way she was received so much by the Polish Jews. I feel rejection often from the local rabbis. Now there's other Jewish groups that receive me, traditional Jews. I'm not talking about Messianic, traditional Jews, but I do feel that rejection by non-Yeshua following Jewish people. And perhaps it's because of what I do, but so when I have an opportunity to do something like this, I started with a thank you. That's really, I mean that, because I don't have enough. I just do not have enough connection with Jewish people. And that's what, and yet I look for it all the time. So thank you.
Our final presenter this morning is Richard Harvey, a Jewish disciple of Yeshua based in the United Kingdom. He's married to Monica and has 2 children and 3 grandchildren. He was a founding member of the London Messianic Congregation and is working on a history of the International Hebrew Christian Alliance, which I will be one of the first people who will want to buy that. So come, Richard, share with us.
Thanks. Can I start my timer from when the PowerPoint gets up?
No, right now.
Okay. If you can get the PowerPoint up, that's good, because I don't preach without PowerPoint these days. But so,
There it is.
oh wait, great. And play first slide.
And now we know how many slides he has. So
Yeah.
you know what we're in for.
Can you press play? First slide. You're not timing me. Press play. Start again.
I have to go to slideshow.
Yeah. And now back one, back one. Back one, yeah. So Ahavat Israel, it's a street in Beit Shemesh. I don't know if you've been there. Such a core value, such a core concept amongst us. But for me as a Jewish disciple of Yeshua, I want to share the personal side and a bit of the theological reflection. And I've started my timer.
Duly noted.
Next one, please. To be in Israel and to love Israel. My mentor, Moish Rosen, just said, be visible, available, and vulnerable. As Greg says, we don't have to be perfect. We're not, but we just have to be visible, available, and vulnerable. And I found that my own family and synagogue connections just keep me within my own particular community. I get to go to synagogue twice on Shabbat at the moment, but both of them are online. I go to the Liberal Jewish Synagogue in St. John's Wood, where that's my cousin, the senior rabbi, Alexander Wright. And I get to go to Zera Avraham in the afternoons. It's a long way to go on Zoom. That's my cousin, and she's called up my uncle, Neil Levitt, who was 95 on Shabbat. And they had a little surprise for him. They got him to come up to say the prayers for King Charles and the royal family. And then they said, hold on a moment. And they gave him a special presentation for being 95 years old. And it was just so lovely to be in a family that's part of a synagogue, in fact, quite an influential part of the synagogue, and just to feel part of that. and to have these reciprocal relationships. Some of you know Melissa Moskowitz, her sister Kathy leads the choir. There's so many Jewish believers in that synagogue that it's just keeping us in touch with our people. And I get invited, I get sent tickets to the high holidays. I'm told off if I don't turn up. And it's just solidarity. But I also know, back one please, the last sentence, understanding the reactions to our faith in Yeshua and our positioning. We have to do our own processing to know that we're not always received with a warm welcome. We're often the black sheep of the family, or the traitor, or the apostate. And we have to live being a celebrity in one community and a leper in another. And that is part of the conundrum as Jewish disciples of Yeshua. And we also have to love in the right way. Next one, please, is my academic bit. When I was a student, you know that if you get to know me, I love debating. And I was a member of the Jewish Society, and I was a member of the Debating Society. And one day we had a combined balloon debate. Do you know what they are? You're in a balloon over the air, and you're losing gas. And so you have to argue your place to stay in the balloon. And as the balloon is losing altitude, each one of you gets thrown out. So we had Karl Marx, Sigmund Freud, Alfred Einstein, the State of Israel, and I took on the role of Jesus. Not that I'm megalomaniac or anything, but this is a balloon debate, British student humor. Don't worry if it's not quite Wycliffe. So eventually Einstein gets knocked out of the balloon first, then Karl Marx gets knocked out, and then who was the other Jewish character? Sorry? Yeah. And then there's just me as Jesus and the State of Israel. And we're the finalists in the balloon debate. And I think I'm winning, but the State of Israel is being argued by a Marxist-Leninist friend of mine, and she thinks she's winning. And then before the audience vote, they say, well, which of you, has either of you been persuaded by the other's arguments? And I suddenly realized, well, if I'm going to be Jesus, I have to jump out of the balloon for the sake of my people. It was a good rhetorical ploy. So I jump out of the balloon as Jesus giving his life for his people. And again, for us as believers in Yeshua, we have to do that. And I came across the phrase Ahavat Yeshua, Ahavat Israel, not just from Tanya and from the use by Chabad, but also a debate or discussion by Gershom Scholem and Hannah Arendt. And this is about tough love, because if we're really loving Israel, we have to have tough love as well as kind love and warm love. But Antoine's laughing at me already. Yeah. Gershom Scholem and Hannah Arendt, after the publication of Arendt's book on Eichmann on trial, Scholem takes her to task. And I think I have the quote on the next slide, please. And I'll read it to you as well. He says, how could you possibly publish this book, which is brings such emotions of bitterness and shame for those who recognize this? She puts Israel on trial for the way it handles the Eichmann trial. Indeed, not for the author's subject matter, but for the author herself. Why does your account so dominate the events it records, which you rightly want people to reflect on? To the degree that I have an answer, I cannot hide it, if only because of my high regard for you. There is something in the Jewish language that is completely indefinable, yet fully concrete, what the Jews call Ahavat Israel, or love for the Jewish people. With you, my dear Hannah, as with so many intellectuals coming from the German left, there is no trace of it. Let's get to the real issue. Tying in with what I just said, I'll begin with Ahavat Israel. This is Arendt's response. She says, by the way, I would be extraordinarily grateful to you if you could tell me when this expression began to play a role in the Hebrew language and literature when it had appeared for the first time, and so on. So Arendt is asking Sholem to tell her what this phrase really means and where it comes from. And Sholem either wasn't familiar with it through Tanya, or he didn't answer that question. And so Arendt has to give her own understanding of what it is. And she says this: I have no such love for two reasons. First, I've never in my life loved some nation or collective, not the German, French, or American nation, or the working class, or whatever else there might be in this price range of loyalties. The fact is that I love only my friends, and I'm quite incapable of any other sort of love. But I am Jewish. And she goes on in her correspondence. But for me, this was telling me that Ahavat Israel is not just a warm, sentimental love. It also can be a tough love. And of course, for us as believers in Yeshua, our love is not always seen to be kind and hasn't always been historically. Next slide, please. Next one, please. And next slide. One of the things that I think we as Yachad BeYeshua have a special gift and calling for is love for our own people who are believers in Yeshua. The church that is already in Israel, and Israel that is already in the church, if you like. We actually have a special gift and calling to be a fellowship of Jewish disciples of Yeshua. And partly that means honoring their memory. So I've been asking the question, how many Jewish Christians perished in the Shoah? I don't think anybody had come up with even the best of estimates about this. So I've put a table together based on the history of Jewish believers in Jesus in each country, in their Hebrew Christian alliances and the non-Aryan Christians, to try and work out this figure to honor and respect them. And part of love is kivud ha'emet, it's honoring those who have departed, as we do in Jewish life. I'm also asking the question, which I don't think has been seriously asked, how many Jewish disciples of Jesus are there today? And I'm trying to get the best estimates of estimates. And again, I see this as part of the love that we have for our people and for Jewish disciples of Yeshua. And then to ask, which I think for Yachad BeYeshua is a visionary challenge, what are our responsibilities towards them? We're not just the 35 people in this room and the 41 participants on Zoom. We are representing probably hundreds of thousands of Jews in churches, messianic congregations, and still in synagogues who love Yeshua and love their people. So for Yeshua, for Yachad BeYeshua, Ahavat Israel includes in a special way love for Yeshua in Israel and Yeshua believers in Israel. Final 10 seconds, last slide. Last slide, please. And the next one. It's so honoring to be here in the place where Yach lived this out. I've given you my own personal journey. Loving Israel with the love of Yeshua by being part of Israel and part of Yeshua, loving Yeshua followers in Israel, and our own special gift and calling. The mitzvah to care for another Jew as though this Jew were you. The power to transcend labels and identify with every Jew in the world. The love Jews have for one another as though we are a single being, because in truth we are. Thank you.